Hey there. Tonight we're talking about why you wouldn't last a night in the sacred carpentry workshops of ancient Egypt in 1350 BCE, where a young woodworker named Kai discovers that true abundance comes not from building monuments to glorify pharaohs, but from mastering the divine art of woodworking that transforms sacred trees into furniture and structures that embody the eternal principles of harmony and proportion that govern all creation in the universe. Before you drift off, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if this kind of transformative deep sleep hypnosis speaks to you. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and how many days in a row you've been on this manifestation journey. I love seeing how committed this community is becoming. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, and let your mind absorb abundance. You wouldn't last a night in the ancient Egyptian carpentry workshops of 1350 BCE, where master craftsmen work through the darkness by the light of oil lamps, their hands moving with precision that approaches perfection as they shape sacred woods according to mathematical principles that reflect the cosmic order itself, where every cut must honor the divine geometry that governs the universe, and every joint must embody the harmonious proportions that maintain balance between earth and sky, between human needs and divine requirements, between the practical necessity of creating functional objects and the sacred obligation to reflect in wood the eternal principles that govern all successful creation and manifestation in both material and spiritual dimensions of existence. The physical demands alone would overwhelm your modern sensibilities within hours, as craftsmen work with hand tools that require absolute precision, shaping massive cedar beams and delicate ivory inlays with equal mastery, understanding that their work will be judged not just by human customers, but by divine powers that observe every aspect of creation and reward excellence, while punishing mediocrity or disrespect for the sacred principles that transform raw materials into objects worthy of serving both earthly and heavenly purposes. The mental pressure would break your concentration as you realize that every piece you create might be destined for royal palaces where pharaohs commune with gods, for temple sanctuaries where priests perform rituals that maintain cosmic balance, or for tombs where the deceased must be provided with furniture that will serve them throughout eternity in realms where inferior craftsmanship could condemn souls to discomfort or dishonor, that extends far beyond the brief span of earthly existence into timeless consequences that affect the fundamental relationship between human consciousness and divine justice. As you settle into your comfortable bed tonight, feeling the soft warmth surrounding your body and hearing the gentle crackle of the fire that creates such a peaceful atmosphere for learning and growth, imagine stepping back through time to witness a world where woodworking represented one of the most sacred technologies that enabled human civilization to create physical structures that could house divine presence and reflect cosmic principles through the careful application of knowledge about sacred geometry, material properties, and the spiritual significance of different types of wood that grew in specific locations and possessed characteristics directly related to their capacity for channeling divine energies and maintaining harmonic resonance with cosmic forces. You're about to enter a story that will carry you through the restful hours of sleep, while your deeper mind absorbs the timeless principles of harmony and precision that Kai learned during those long summer nights in the carpentry quarter of ancient Thebes, where master craftsmen guarded secrets of wood selection, joinery techniques, and finishing methods that had been developed through generations of careful observation and spiritual insight about how different materials respond to various treatments and how finished objects can be designed to enhance rather than disturb the natural flow of energies that determine whether spaces and furnishings support human flourishing or create subtle disharmonies that undermine health, prosperity, and spiritual development. Feel yourself beginning to relax as we journey back to a time when wealth was measured not in accumulated possessions, but in the mastery of creative processes that could transform raw wood into finished objects that solved real problems while simultaneously honoring divine principles that govern all successful manifestation, when prosperity flowed to those who understood that true value comes from patient application of skill and wisdom to create things that others genuinely need for achieving both practical objectives and spiritual aspirations, and when abundance consciousness meant recognizing that the greatest fortunes are built by mastering the fundamental processes of transformation that enable raw potential to become realized beauty through the application of precision, patience, time, and conscious intention, guided by accumulated wisdom about how human consciousness can work in harmony with natural materials to create results that serve both immediate utility and eternal purposes. The summer evening air in ancient Egypt carries the rich scents of cedar shavings, acacia sawdust, and the precious oils and resins that master carpenters use to finish their work, creating surfaces that not only protect the wood, but enhance its natural beauty while providing tactile experiences that connect users to the living essence of trees that once grew in sacred groves, where they absorbed energies from earth and sky that become permanently embedded in their cellular structure and continue to influence everyone who touches objects crafted from their wood. This is a world where every economic transaction carries profound spiritual significance, because the difference between adequate woodworking and superior craftsmanship can literally determine whether spaces support divine presence or repel it, whether furniture enhances meditation and spiritual practice, or creates distractions that interfere with consciousness development, and whether buildings provide environments that promote health and harmony, or generate subtle imbalances that contribute to illness, conflict, and spiritual stagnation that can affect entire communities for generations. The carpentry workshops represent far more than simple manufacturing facilities. They serve as temples of transformation, where master craftsmen commune with the spirits of trees to create objects that extend human capability while maintaining perfect harmony with natural forces and cosmic principles, enabling the kind of architectural achievements, furniture design, and decorative arts that distinguish Egyptian civilization as one of humanity's most successful experiments in creating physical environments that support both material prosperity and spiritual development through conscious application of sacred knowledge about proportions, materials, and construction techniques that reflect divine wisdom about how form influences consciousness and how consciousness shapes the material world through focused intention and skillful action. As you allow your breathing to slow naturally while your mind opens to receive these profound lessons about the relationship between craftsmanship and cosmic harmony, you might begin to recognize how these same principles continue to operate in your modern world, where true abundance still flows most readily to those who master processes of transformation that convert raw materials into finished products that others value highly enough to exchange their resources to obtain, who understand that lasting success comes from developing capabilities that enable consistent creation of superior value while maintaining harmony with natural principles, and who recognize that the highest levels of prosperity are achieved by those who help others create environments and obtain objects that enhance their ability to achieve both practical objectives and spiritual aspirations. The summer evening light filters through the papyrus screens of the Carpentry quarter in ancient Thebes, illuminating the working areas where dozens of skilled craftsmen labor with focused reverence beside carefully organized collections of precious woods, that have been transported from the furthest reaches of the Egyptian Empire and beyond, each piece selected not just for its practical properties, but for its spiritual significance and capacity to channel divine energies through objects that will serve human needs, while maintaining perfect harmony with cosmic principles that govern all successful creation and manifestation in both earthly and heavenly realms. Kai stands at the threshold of this sacred workspace, his heart pounding with excitement and overwhelming uncertainty as he observes master carpenters like Ptah the Wise, whose furniture graces the private chambers of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, and whose temple decorations have been blessed by high priests who recognize his ability to create objects that enhance rather than disturb the delicate spiritual atmospheres required for successful communion between human consciousness and divine presence, demonstrate techniques for wood selection and preparation that involve knowledge accumulated through generations of careful experimentation about how different types of trees respond to various treatments and how their inherent characteristics can be enhanced or diminished depending on how they are harvested, seasoned, and worked by craftsmen who understand the living essence that continues to reside within wood long after trees have been cut. As you allow yourself to sink deeper into the comfortable support of your bed, feeling the soft warmth enveloping your body like a protective cocoon that shields you from all concerns and worries, while your mind becomes increasingly receptive to the profound lessons about harmony and prosperity that Kai is about to learn through his apprenticeship with master craftsmen who understand that woodworking represents far more than simple furniture making, but actually encompasses one of the sacred technologies that enabled Egyptian civilization to create physical environments that could support both material abundance and spiritual development through conscious application of divine principles that govern the proper relationship between human consciousness and natural materials. Imagine the overwhelming sensory experience of the active workshop, where the constant sound of hand tools shaping wood creates a rhythmic meditation that synchronizes with the heartbeat of an entire civilization whose cultural achievements and spiritual development depend on the reliable production of objects that serve every aspect of human existence, from the most mundane daily activities to the most sacred ritual purposes that connect earthly life to divine intentions and cosmic patterns. The air shimmers with purposeful activity as craftsmen work in coordinated harmony, each individual contributing specialized skills to the collaborative effort of transforming raw wood into finished objects that represent the integrated application of technical knowledge, artistic sensibility, and spiritual understanding that enables master carpenters to create products that satisfy not just functional requirements, but also aesthetic expectations and sacred purposes that determine whether objects enhance their users' connection to divine principles or create subtle disturbances that interfere with spiritual development and material prosperity. You wouldn't understand the crushing weight of responsibility that settles on Kai's shoulders as he realizes that his family's entire future prosperity depends on his ability to master not just the basic techniques of woodworking, but the sophisticated understanding of sacred geometry, material properties, and spiritual principles that enable master carpenters to create objects that consistently meet the exacting standards expected by customers who can choose from many different craftsmen and who will quickly abandon any carpenter whose work proves inadequate for serving both practical needs and spiritual purposes that require absolute precision and perfect harmony with cosmic principles that govern all successful creation. The Egyptian economy offers no safety nets for those who fail to master their chosen crafts to levels that enable them to compete successfully with established artisans whose reputations have been built through decades of consistent excellence. Unsuccessful carpenters don't simply lose customers or need to find alternative sources of income. They face social displacement from communities that depend on reliable access to superior woodworking for maintaining the physical environments and sacred objects that enable Egyptian civilization to flourish as one of humanity's most successful experiments in creating societies that support both material abundance and spiritual development through conscious application of divine wisdom about how physical environments influence consciousness and how consciousness shapes material reality through focused intention and skillful action. Master Ptah moves through the workshop with the quiet authority of someone whose reputation has been earned through thousands of successful projects and satisfied customers whose objects have performed flawlessly under conditions ranging from daily household use to sacred ceremonial applications, where failure would be not just embarrassing, but potentially sacrilegious in a culture where religious observances require specific types of furniture and decorations that must meet exacting specifications for purity, proportion, and spiritual appropriateness. Kai watches in fascination as Ptah demonstrates the critical importance of wood selection and seasoning, explaining how different types of trees possess distinct characteristics that must be understood and utilized appropriately to create objects suited for different applications, from delicate jewelry boxes that must hold precious items while maintaining perfect humidity control, to massive architectural elements that must support enormous loads while resisting the environmental stresses of desert climate and Nile flooding that test every aspect of construction quality and material selection. This level of material knowledge represents far more than simple craft technique. It encompasses understanding of botany, physics, and spiritual principles that enables master carpenters to predict with remarkable accuracy how different wood species will behave during seasoning, working, and service conditions that test every aspect of their cellular structure and energy signature. As you feel yourself relaxing more deeply, allowing these insights about the profound relationship between knowledge and craftsmanship to settle into your consciousness while your breathing becomes slower and more natural, you might begin to recognize how these same principles of material mastery and spiritual sensitivity continue to apply in your modern world, where true prosperity still flows most readily to those who develop deep understanding of their materials and processes while maintaining awareness of the subtle influences that affect both technical performance and human well-being, who take full responsibility for the quality and appropriateness of their work, and who recognize that lasting success requires not just technical competence, but the kind of holistic understanding that enables creation of products that serve multiple levels of human need while supporting rather than undermining the natural harmonies that govern sustainable prosperity. The evening workshop reveals layers of complexity that Kai had never previously imagined, as he observes how master craftsmen coordinate their individual specialties to create production systems that can reliably produce objects that meet the diverse requirements of customers, ranging from humble farmers who need basic furniture to wealthy nobles who commission elaborate pieces that display their status and cultural sophistication, and even temple priests who require ceremonial objects that must meet exacting specifications for spiritual purity, geometric precision, and symbolic appropriateness that reflects religious beliefs and cosmic principles governing successful ritual practice and divine communion. Master Khnum, whose innovative techniques for joining different wood species have created furniture designs that surpass traditional approaches in both strength and beauty, while maintaining the spiritual harmony necessary for objects destined for sacred use, demonstrates how technical innovation can create competitive advantages that enable superior pricing while providing genuine value to customers who appreciate both functional excellence and aesthetic beauty in objects that enhance their daily lives and spiritual practices. This systematic approach to innovation reveals that Egyptian woodworking involves far more than simply following traditional patterns passed down through generations. The most successful carpenters continuously experiment with new techniques, carefully test modifications under controlled conditions, and systematically incorporate improvements that enhance both performance and appearance, while maintaining the proven spiritual appropriateness that makes their objects trusted by experienced customers who understand the difference between mere technical competence and true mastery that creates objects capable of supporting both practical activities and spiritual development. Kai begins to understand that this balance between innovation and tradition requires deep understanding of why traditional techniques work, what specific spiritual and practical problems they solve, and how modifications might affect the complex relationships between material properties, construction methods, environmental conditions, and energy dynamics that must work together harmoniously to create objects capable of meeting customer expectations for both immediate utility and long-term service in applications that may include exposure to desert heat, Nile humidity, and the subtle energy fields that characterize sacred spaces. As Kai watches Master Kanum explain the reasoning behind a particular joinery technique that distributes stress more evenly while maintaining the geometric proportions required for objects destined for temple use, he realizes that successful woodworking requires not just skilled hands, but systematic thinking that can understand complex relationships between structural engineering, aesthetic principles, and spiritual requirements, anticipate potential problems before they occur, and develop solutions that address multiple requirements simultaneously without compromising the overall quality and appropriateness of finished objects. This level of integrated thinking about complex design challenges represents a form of intelligence that goes far beyond simple craft knowledge to encompass the kind of holistic reasoning that enables human beings to create objects that serve multiple purposes while maintaining harmony with natural principles and cosmic patterns that govern all successful manifestation. The sophisticated wood preparation and treatment processes that characterize successful Egyptian carpentry reveal another dimension of the technical knowledge required for creating objects that consistently meet quality standards while maintaining the spiritual appropriateness necessary for items that may be used in sacred contexts where inferior materials or inadequate preparation could compromise the effectiveness of ritual practices and disturb the delicate energy balances that enable successful communion between human consciousness and divine presence. Master Thoth demonstrates techniques for seasoning wood that involve not just removing moisture, but actually enhancing the material's capacity to channel beneficial energies while neutralizing any negative influences that might have been absorbed during the tree's lifetime or the harvesting and preparation process, ensuring that finished objects support rather than undermine the spiritual and practical activities for which they are intended. Kai observes that this holistic approach to material preparation represents sophisticated understanding of energy dynamics, environmental influences, and spiritual principles that enables craftsmen to control not just the physical properties of wood, but also its subtle characteristics that affect how objects influence the consciousness and well-being of everyone who uses them, demonstrating how true mastery creates products that serve multiple levels of human need while supporting the natural harmonies that enable sustainable prosperity and spiritual development. This comprehensive approach to quality control reveals principles of holistic design and conscious manufacturing that enable human communities to create objects and environments that enhance rather than compromise their capacity for achieving both material success and spiritual advancement through conscious application of knowledge about how physical forms influence consciousness and how consciousness shapes material reality through focused intention and skillful action. As you allow these insights about holistic craftsmanship and conscious creation to flow naturally into your consciousness, feeling your body becoming more relaxed and your mind more receptive to the deeper lessons about prosperity and harmony that Kai is discovering, you might recognize how these same principles continue to operate in your modern world, where the most successful enterprises depend on understanding and serving multiple levels of human need while maintaining harmony with natural principles that enable sustainable success, who recognize that true competitive advantage comes from creating products that enhance rather than compromise human well-being and environmental balance, and who understand that lasting prosperity requires not just technical excellence, but conscious attention to the subtle influences that determine whether objects and environments support or undermine the natural patterns that govern health, happiness, and spiritual development. The summer evening continues to unfold with Kai discovering that successful woodworking involves far more than individual technical skills, encompassing sophisticated understanding of customer psychology, cultural symbolism, and social dynamics that determine whether objects succeed or fail in the complex cultural and spiritual environment of Egyptian civilization, where furniture and decorations serve not just functional needs, but also symbolic and energy-regulating purposes that reflect social status, spiritual development, and individual connection to cosmic principles that determine prosperity, health, and the proper relationship between human consciousness and divine wisdom. Master Ptah demonstrates this principle as he explains how different design choices affect not only the practical utility and aesthetic appeal of objects, but also their capacity to support or interfere with the subtle energy flows that influence consciousness, health, and spiritual development in ways that may not be immediately obvious, but which accumulate over time to create significant impacts on user well-being and environmental harmony. This customer-focused approach to design and production represents a sophisticated form of value creation that goes far beyond simple object manufacture to encompass consulting, energy management, and spiritual service activities that create lasting competitive advantages while serving customers' complex needs for objects that support both practical activities and spiritual development in ways that pure technical excellence alone cannot achieve. As you absorb this understanding about the multiple dimensions of value that successful craftsmen provide, feeling your breathing become slower and more rhythmic, while your mind opens to new possibilities for creating abundance in your own life. You might recognize how these same principles apply in modern contexts, where the most prosperous individuals and organizations succeed not just by creating technically excellent products or services, but by understanding and serving the full range of human needs, including practical requirements, aesthetic preferences, environmental considerations, and subtle influences that affect well-being and performance in ways that determine whether business relationships thrive or merely survive in competitive environments. As the ancient summer evening deepens and the blazing heat of the Egyptian day begins to give way to the blessed relief of cooler temperatures that make intricate detail work possible again, Kai discovers that successful woodworking requires fluency in what Master Ptah calls the language of wood, a sophisticated understanding of how different species communicate their properties, potential, and spiritual characteristics through subtle visual, tactile, and even energetic cues that experienced carpenters learn to read as naturally as you might read hieroglyphs on papyrus, but which requires years of patient observation, systematic experimentation, and spiritual development to master completely enough to create objects that consistently honor both the practical requirements and sacred purposes that distinguish Egyptian craftsmanship as one of humanity's highest achievements in the art of transforming natural materials into objects that support both material prosperity and spiritual advancement. The ancient forests that provide the raw material for Egyptian woodworking contain within their cellular structure and energy signature a complete history of growing conditions, seasonal variations, and environmental influences that created characteristics directly relevant to how different types of wood will perform when subjected to the complex sequence of seasoning, shaping, joining, and finishing operations that transform living trees into finished objects with properties that determine whether final products will meet customer expectations for durability, beauty, and spiritual appropriateness. As you settle more deeply into the comfortable embrace of your bed, feeling the soft warmth surrounding your body and the gentle crackling of the fire, creating such a peaceful backdrop for absorbing these profound lessons about transformation and harmony that remain just as relevant in your modern world as they were in Kai's ancient workshop. Imagine his growing amazement as he realizes that every piece of wood tells a story that experienced carpenters can decipher with remarkable accuracy. Reading the history of natural processes and spiritual influences through careful examination of grain patterns, color variations, density characteristics, and dozens of other subtle indicators that reveal whether specific materials will provide the working properties and energy characteristics required for particular types of objects that must function reliably while supporting rather than disturbing the delicate spiritual atmospheres that characterize homes, temples, and other spaces where human consciousness seeks harmony with divine principles. This profound level of material knowledge represents far more than simple craft technique. It encompasses understanding of botany, energy dynamics, and spiritual principles that enables master carpenters to predict with remarkable accuracy how different wood compositions will behave during each stage of the production process, from initial selection through final finishing, allowing them to choose and prepare materials that will produce objects with exactly the characteristics needed for specific applications, while avoiding the defects and inappropriate energy patterns that can destroy weeks of careful work and create objects that fail to serve their intended purposes or actually interfere with the activities and spiritual development of users who depend on their furniture and decorations for supporting both practical needs and consciousness development. Master Ptah demonstrates this principle as he examines a shipment of cedar from the Lebanon mountains, pointing out subtle variations in grain structure and aromatic intensity that indicate differences in growing conditions and harvesting timing that will affect not only working characteristics and durability, but also the wood's capacity to maintain and transmit beneficial energies that enhance rather than disturb the spiritual atmospheres where finished objects will be used. You wouldn't immediately grasp the sophisticated quality control systems that Egyptian carpenters employ naturally, almost unconsciously, as they evaluate every piece of material that goes into their objects, recognizing that the demanding environment of daily use and spiritual application provides unforgiving feedback about material selection and preparation techniques, where inferior wood or inadequate seasoning result in failures that can't be hidden, ignored, or explained away, because customers will quickly discover any deficiencies and will just as quickly take their business to competitors who demonstrate more consistent excellence in both technical performance and spiritual appropriateness. The economic and cultural incentives in Egyptian society create natural selection pressure that drives continuous improvement in both materials and techniques, because carpenters whose objects fail lose not just their current customers, but their reputation within communities. where information about quality and spiritual appropriateness travels quickly and accurately through networks of priests, nobles, and craftsmen that share detailed knowledge about which carpenters consistently produce objects that enhance rather than disturb the environments and activities they are intended to support. As you allow your breathing to become slower and more natural, while these insights about quality control and reputation-based economics settle into your consciousness, you might recognize how these same dynamics continue to operate in your modern world, where true prosperity still flows most readily to those who consistently deliver superior quality that performs reliably under demanding conditions while supporting rather than compromising human well-being and environmental harmony, who understand that their reputation represents their most valuable asset that must be protected through unwavering commitment to excellence, even when competitive pressures or short-term opportunities tempt them to compromise on the standards that have established their credibility with customers who depend on consistent performance for achieving their own important objectives while maintaining harmony with natural principles that govern sustainable success. The evening workshop reveals another dimension of complexity that Kai hadn't previously understood. The sophisticated understanding of energy dynamics and environmental influences that enables Egyptian carpenters to create objects and spaces that optimize both functional performance and subtle atmospheric qualities while maintaining the precise harmony necessary for achieving consistent results that support both practical activities and spiritual development in environments where energy balance directly affects consciousness, health, and the capacity for achieving material prosperity through activities that require clear thinking, emotional stability, and spiritual insight. Master Khnum demonstrates how subtle changes in wood orientation affect both the structural properties and energy flow patterns of finished objects, explaining that grain direction influences not only strength and stability, but also the capacity for channeling beneficial energies while neutralizing negative influences that could accumulate over time and create environmental disturbances that interfere with human well-being and spiritual development. This systematic approach to energy management reveals that Egyptian woodworking involves far more than following traditional design patterns. The most successful carpenters continuously analyze the relationship between form and energy flow in their creations, systematically test modifications to improve both functional performance and atmospheric quality, and carefully document their findings to build knowledge bases that enable them to achieve superior consistency while developing innovations that enhance both utility and spiritual appropriateness in ways that create competitive advantages and justify premium pricing for customers who value excellence and harmony over simple adequacy or low cost that may seem attractive initially, but proves inadequate when objects must support demanding activities and sensitive spiritual practices over extended periods of use. Kai begins to understand that this holistic approach to design requires not just technical skill, but spiritual sensitivity that can perceive subtle energy patterns and environmental influences, anticipate potential problems before they manifest, and develop solutions that optimize overall harmony rather than simply addressing individual functional requirements without regard for how changes might affect other characteristics that contribute to user satisfaction and environmental balance. The sophisticated joinery and finishing techniques that complement basic woodworking demonstrate another aspect of the integrated knowledge required for creating complete objects that function as harmonious systems rather than collections of individual components that happen to be assembled together without proper understanding of how different elements interact to create overall performance characteristics and energy signatures that determine user satisfaction and environmental appropriateness. Master Thoth explains how different joining methods must be matched to specific wood combinations and intended applications to ensure not only structural integrity, but also energy continuity that enables finished objects to function as unified energy systems rather than assemblages of disparate parts that create conflicting influences, and how surface treatments must be coordinated with spiritual intentions and environmental requirements to achieve optimal protection and energy enhancement, while maintaining the natural beauty and positive characteristics that make wood objects valuable for supporting both practical activities and spiritual development. Kai observes that this systems thinking approach to object design reveals principles of integration and harmony that enable human beings to create furniture and decorations far more sophisticated than the sum of their individual components, demonstrating how conscious coordination of different technical and spiritual specialties can produce results that seem almost magical when compared to what might be achieved through random assembly of even high-quality individual techniques without proper understanding of how they should work together to create superior overall performance that serves multiple levels of human need while maintaining harmony with natural principles and cosmic patterns. This holistic approach to complex creative challenges shows how prosperity flows naturally to those who understand that true value is created through intelligent integration of diverse capabilities and knowledge, rather than simply accumulating individual skills or materials without regard for how they can be harmonized to solve important problems that customers face in their efforts to create environments and obtain objects that support both material success and spiritual development. As you allow these insights about systems thinking and integrated creative development to flow naturally into your consciousness, feeling your mind becoming more receptive and your body more completely relaxed, you might notice how your own understanding of value creation begins to encompass these more sophisticated approaches to problem solving that recognize how individual expertise becomes exponentially more valuable when combined intelligently with complementary knowledge and spiritual awareness possessed by others who share common goals and commitment to excellence in serving both practical needs and higher purposes that benefit entire communities while supporting individual growth and consciousness development. The ancient evening continues to unfold with Kai, discovering that successful carpenters don't just create individual objects, but participate in larger cultural networks that span vast distances and connect Egyptian workshops to trading opportunities extending from Nubian gold mines to Mesopotamian cedar forests, from Mediterranean island quarries to African ebony groves, where different types of materials and specialized knowledge create opportunities for collaborative production that serves markets throughout the ancient world, where superior woodworking commands respect and premium prices from customers who understand the value of objects that combine functional excellence with spiritual appropriateness in ways that enhance both practical utility and environmental harmony. Master Ptah demonstrates this principle as he explains how design decisions made during object creation directly affect the success of trading relationships and cultural exchanges that carry Egyptian craftsmanship to distant lands, where objects must not only meet functional requirements, but also communicate the cultural values and spiritual sophistication that distinguish Egyptian civilization as one of humanity's most successful experiments in creating societies that support both material abundance and consciousness development. This understanding of how craftsmanship enables cultural influence and commercial success in broader contexts reveals that the most prosperous carpenters focus not just on creating technically excellent objects, but on understanding and serving the complete range of requirements that determine whether their work enhances Egypt's reputation and trading relationships, while contributing to the cultural and spiritual development that benefits entire communities through the creation of objects that demonstrate the highest achievements possible when human consciousness works in harmony with natural materials and cosmic principles. Kai realizes that this culturally aware approach to craftsmanship represents a fundamental principle of sustainable abundance that extends far beyond woodworking to encompass any situation where value is created through activities that serve not only immediate customers, but also broader purposes related to cultural development, spiritual advancement, and the demonstration of human potential for creating beauty and meaning through conscious application of skill and wisdom. As you absorb this understanding about the relationship between craftsmanship and cultural influence, feeling your breathing become slower and more rhythmic, while your mind opens to new insights about how prosperity flows through networks of mutual benefit and collaborative value creation that serve purposes larger than individual profit. You might recognize how these same principles continue to operate in your modern world, where lasting abundance comes not from extracting maximum value from individual transactions, but from building relationships and capabilities that enable sustained contribution to cultural and spiritual development, while achieving personal success through activities that benefit others and advance human potential for creating harmony between material prosperity and consciousness development. The sophisticated trade relationships and cultural exchange that support Egyptian woodworking reveal another dimension of the social infrastructure required for creating objects that meet the diverse requirements of customers ranging from local farmers to foreign dignitaries, from temple priests to royal family members, where woodwork must meet exacting standards for both functional performance and cultural appropriateness that reflects the spiritual sophistication and artistic achievement that distinguish Egyptian civilization as a model for how human societies can create environments that support both material abundance and spiritual development through conscious application of knowledge about harmony, proportion, and the proper relationship between human consciousness and divine principles. Master Khnum demonstrates techniques for understanding cultural requirements, developing international relationships, and creating objects that communicate Egyptian values while serving practical needs, enabling access to customers who value spiritual sophistication and cultural achievement enough to pay premium prices that justify the investment in time, materials, and expertise required for creating woodwork that consistently exceeds expectations and builds lasting relationships based on appreciation for excellence rather than simply convenience or competitive pricing. The evening workshop also reveals how master craftsmen approach the crucial challenge of training apprentices and preserving cultural knowledge that represents centuries of accumulated understanding about materials, techniques, and spiritual principles that enable the creation of objects capable of serving both practical requirements and sacred purposes, while maintaining the production quality necessary for sustainable business operations that can support families and invest in continued capability development. Ptah explains how knowledge transfer requires not just demonstration of specific techniques, but development of understanding about underlying principles that enable apprentices to adapt their skills to new challenges and continue improving their capabilities throughout their careers. As cultural conditions change and new requirements emerge that demand innovative solutions based on solid foundations of proven principles and deep understanding of the natural laws that govern successful creation and manifestation. This educational approach to skill development demonstrates how sustainable prosperity depends not just on individual excellence, but on the creation of knowledge systems and training programs that enable entire communities to maintain and improve their capabilities over time, creating cultural advantages that benefit everyone involved while ensuring that valuable wisdom is preserved and enhanced, rather than lost, through lack of systematic attention to knowledge transfer and capability development. As you allow these insights about education, knowledge preservation, and cultural development to settle into your consciousness, while feeling your body becoming more relaxed and your mind more open to new understanding, you might recognize how these same principles apply in your modern context, where long-term abundance depends on developing and sharing knowledge that enables others to achieve their own success, while contributing to the overall advancement of human capability and consciousness development through collaborative learning and mutual support. As the ancient summer evening transitions into the deeper twilight hours, when the oppressive heat of the Egyptian day finally begins to ease, and the carpentry workshops can resume the detailed work that requires steady hands and clear spiritual focus, Kai witnesses something that fundamentally transforms his understanding of how true mastery in woodworking requires not just perfect execution of traditional techniques, but the profound wisdom to recognize that every piece of furniture and every architectural element represents an opportunity to embody sacred geometric principles that go far beyond simple functional design to encompass the miraculous process by which human consciousness can create physical forms that resonate with cosmic harmonies and serve as conduits for divine energies that enhance both material prosperity and spiritual development for everyone who uses or encounters these carefully crafted objects. Master Ptah receives a commission from the high priests of Karnak for a series of ceremonial furniture pieces that must meet specifications more demanding than any woodworking Kai has ever imagined, requiring not just technical perfection in joinery and finishing, but deep understanding of mathematical proportions, astronomical alignments, and geometric relationships that enable objects to serve not just practical functions, but sacred purposes that connect earthly activities to cosmic patterns and divine intentions that govern the proper relationship between human consciousness and universal principles of creation and manifestation. As you allow yourself to sink deeper into the comfortable support of your bed, feeling the gentle warmth surrounding your body and the peaceful crackling of the fire, creating the perfect atmosphere for absorbing these profound lessons about sacred geometry and the deeper meanings of craftsmanship that remain just as relevant in your modern world as they were in Kai's ancient workshop. Imagine his growing excitement as he realizes that the most successful carpenters don't just make furniture. They participate in processes of cosmic creation that reflect fundamental principles of universal order itself, turning geometric concepts into physical reality through the application of precise measurements, perfect proportions, and conscious intention in ways that demonstrate how human consciousness can work in harmony with mathematical principles and natural forces to create results that seem impossible when viewed from the perspective of ordinary thinking, but become natural and inevitable when approached with proper understanding of the sacred geometry that governs all successful creation and manifestation in both material and spiritual dimensions of existence. This approach to woodworking as participation in cosmic order demonstrates a fundamental principle of sustainable prosperity that Kai had never previously understood. Truly masterful work serves purposes larger than individual benefit, creating value that enhances not just immediate practical utility, but cultural development and spiritual advancement that benefit entire civilizations while reflecting the universal human aspiration to create beauty and meaning through skillful work that honors both material requirements and transcendent mathematical principles. The evening workshop reveals that mastery in Egyptian woodworking requires sophisticated understanding of how modifications to traditional proportions might affect the complex relationships between mathematical harmony, structural integrity, aesthetic appeal, and energy flow patterns that determine whether objects achieve their highest potential for serving both practical needs and spiritual purposes, or merely meet minimum functional requirements without expressing the sacred geometry and divine proportions that distinguish truly masterful work from merely adequate craftsmanship that satisfies basic needs without inspiring reverence or creating lasting value that justifies premium pricing and customer loyalty based on genuine appreciation for mathematical perfection rather than simple convenience or competitive cost. Master Kunum demonstrates this principle as he explains his systematic approach to developing new furniture designs that incorporate recently discovered astronomical observations and mathematical relationships, requiring careful experimentation with proportional systems, geometric progressions, and harmonic ratios that must be tested through both physical prototypes and spiritual meditation before being applied to important commissions, where failure would be not just embarrassing, but potentially catastrophic for customer relationships and professional reputation that has been built through decades of consistent excellence in both technical execution and sacred appropriateness. This methodical approach to innovation reveals that successful advancement requires not just creativity and technical skill, but mathematical understanding that can analyze complex geometric relationships, predict potential consequences of proportional changes before implementing them, and develop testing procedures that provide reliable information about how modifications will affect both structural performance and energy dynamics under real-world conditions before committing to approaches that could affect the sacred appropriateness and spiritual effectiveness of important projects. Kai begins to understand that this analytical approach to innovation represents a sophisticated form of design methodology that enables craftsmen to pursue improvements while ensuring that all changes maintain harmony with cosmic principles and mathematical laws that form the foundation of their reputation and customer relationships in cultural contexts where trust is earned through consistent demonstration of both technical competence and spiritual understanding over extended periods of time under challenging conditions that reveal character and wisdom with unforgiving clarity. You wouldn't immediately grasp the sophisticated geometric analysis that Egyptian carpenters employ naturally as they develop and test innovations that could improve performance while maintaining sacred appropriateness, recognizing that the demanding environment of temple use and royal service provides the ultimate testing ground where theoretical improvements must prove their value under conditions that can't be fully simulated or predicted with complete accuracy, making careful geometric design essential for distinguishing between modifications that enhance sacred function and changes that might seem beneficial under limited testing, but could prove spiritually inappropriate or energetically disruptive under the extreme conditions that furniture inevitably encounters during extended use in sacred spaces where energy balance directly affects ritual effectiveness and divine communion. The cultural and spiritual incentives in Egyptian society create natural selection pressure that rewards genuine innovation while quickly eliminating approaches that compromise sacred appropriateness or mathematical harmony, because the consequences of geometric failures are immediate, visible, and impossible to conceal from communities where information about spiritual effectiveness spreads rapidly through networks of priests, nobles, and initiates that share detailed knowledge about which carpenters consistently produce objects that enhance rather than disturb sacred spaces and ceremonial activities. As you allow your breathing to become slower and more natural, while these insights about sacred geometry and systematic innovation settle into your consciousness, you might recognize how these same principles continue to operate in your modern world, where sustainable prosperity still flows most readily to those who can balance innovation with time-tested principles, who understand that true competitive advantage comes from systematic improvement that maintains harmony with natural laws rather than random experimentation that ignores fundamental principles, and who recognize that lasting success requires building customer trust through consistent demonstration of both technical excellence and deep understanding of the principles that govern sustainable creation, while continuously developing new capabilities that serve evolving needs more effectively than competitors who either resist change or pursue innovation without adequate attention to maintaining the proven harmony that customers depend on for achieving their own important objectives. The ancient evening progresses with Kai discovering how master carpenters use their understanding of broader astronomical and mathematical developments to anticipate future requirements and begin developing solutions before cultural demands become obvious to competitors, creating first-mover advantages that enable them to capture premium pricing and preferred customer relationships when new opportunities emerge in response to changing religious practices, architectural innovations, or mathematical discoveries that create demand for furniture with different geometric characteristics than traditional designs can provide efficiently. Master Thoth explains how his analysis of recent astronomical observations and temple modifications has led him to develop specialized furniture designs optimized for new ceremonial requirements, from meditation seats that incorporate recently discovered harmonic ratios to altar tables, reflect updated understanding of celestial mechanics, where mathematical precision and spiritual appropriateness must be combined in ways that reflect the highest achievements of Egyptian knowledge and cultural sophistication. This strategic approach to product development demonstrates that lasting prosperity requires not just technical excellence in current products, but mathematical intelligence and cultural awareness that enable anticipation of future opportunities while developing the capabilities needed to serve emerging spiritual and ceremonial needs more effectively than competitors who react to changes after they become obvious to everyone in the crafting community. Kai observes that this forward-thinking approach requires continuous investment in mathematical study, spiritual development, and capability building, even when current products are performing successfully. Recognizing that sustainable competitive advantage comes from staying ahead of cultural evolution, rather than simply maintaining current market position through more efficient execution of established approaches that may become obsolete. As spiritual understanding advances and new geometric insights emerge that demand innovative solutions based on solid foundations of proven mathematical principles and sacred wisdom. As you absorb this understanding about strategic innovation and cultural anticipation, feeling your mind becoming more receptive and your body more completely relaxed, you might notice how your own awareness of opportunities begins to expand beyond immediate circumstances to encompass longer-term trends and emerging possibilities that could represent significant sources of value creation in your personal and professional life if you develop the mathematical understanding and spiritual sensitivity needed to recognize and serve evolving needs before they become obvious to everyone else in your field or industry. The evening workshop reveals another dimension of sacred geometry that Kai hadn't previously considered: the importance of what Master Ptah calls proportional harmony integration, the disciplined process of combining mathematical insights from different sources, including astronomical observations, architectural discoveries, musical theory, and even natural growth patterns, to create comprehensive understanding that enables continuous improvement in both technical capabilities and spiritual effectiveness through synthesis of information that might seem unrelated, but actually reveals geometric patterns and mathematical principles that can be applied to enhance both functional performance and sacred appropriateness. Master Pitta demonstrates how he maintains detailed records of proportional relationships, geometric progressions, harmonic ratios, and spiritual feedback for every project his workshop produces, creating a comprehensive database of mathematical information that enables him to identify patterns, predict geometric outcomes, and systematically improve his methods based on mathematical evidence rather than tradition or intuition alone. This systematic approach to geometric knowledge management enables him to make better decisions about proportional selection, design optimization, and spatial relationships, while providing the mathematical foundation needed for training apprentices more effectively and developing innovations that address real spiritual requirements rather than pursuing changes that might seem interesting but don't actually improve sacred function or geometric harmony in measurable ways that justify the time and resources required for implementation. Kai realizes that this disciplined approach to mathematical integration and geometric analysis represents a crucial difference between craftsmen who achieve steady improvement over time versus those who repeat the same proportions year after year without systematic learning from geometric principles or feedback from users who experience their objects under real-world conditions. As you allow this understanding about systematic mathematical learning and geometric knowledge management to flow naturally into your consciousness, feeling your breathing become slower and more rhythmic, while your mind opens to new insights about how expertise develops through conscious attention to mathematical principles and systematic geometric improvement, you might recognize how these same principles apply in your modern context, where sustained success requires not just initial competence, but continuous learning and improvement based on careful attention to underlying patterns and systematic development of better approaches to creating harmony and proportion in whatever work you choose to pursue. The sophisticated material sourcing and geometric preparation that supports innovative woodworking reveals another aspect of the system's thinking required for creating objects that incorporate the best available materials and geometric relationships from sources throughout the ancient world, enabling carpenters to access specialized woods and mathematical knowledge that might not be available locally, but which provide superior harmonic characteristics that justify the additional complexity and cost of sourcing materials and consulting with mathematicians from distant centers of learning who maintain geometric standards that meet the exacting requirements of master craftsmen. Master Kanum explains how his relationships with tree specialists throughout the known world, mathematical scholars who understand advanced geometric principles, and spiritual advisors who can evaluate energy characteristics enable him to obtain both materials and knowledge that meet his exact specifications for different applications, creating supply and information networks that support innovation while maintaining the mathematical precision necessary for building objects that meet the demanding harmonic standards expected by experienced customers who understand the difference between adequate and exceptional geometric harmony. This network-based approach to both material and knowledge access demonstrates how innovation often depends not just on individual creativity and technical skill, but on building relationships and systems that provide access to the best available materials, mathematical insights, and spiritual guidance from multiple sources that can be integrated to create superior results than would be possible using only locally available resources or individual expertise without collaborative support from specialists in different aspects of geometric harmony and sacred proportion. Kai observes that this collaborative approach to innovation enables the achievement of results that would be impossible for any individual carpenter working alone, regardless of personal skill or mathematical knowledge. demonstrating how sustainable prosperity depends on building networks and relationships that enable access to resources and knowledge beyond what any single person or workshop can develop independently. The evening workshop reveals how innovative carpenters use their understanding of changing spiritual requirements to develop new products and services that address emerging ceremonial needs while leveraging their existing capabilities and reputation to enter new market segments that provide opportunities for growth and diversification beyond traditional furniture activities. Ta explains how his expertise in sacred geometry has led to opportunities for consulting with temple architects who need advice about proportional relationships, collaborating with priests who require ceremonial objects with specific geometric characteristics, and even participating in the design of new ritual spaces, where his knowledge of harmonic proportions and energy flow provides valuable input for spiritual leaders who must make decisions about spatial relationships and object placement that will determine the effectiveness of ceremonial activities and the quality of divine communion that can be achieved in those environments. This expansion beyond core manufacturing activities demonstrates how mathematical mastery can create multiple revenue streams and cultural opportunities that leverage existing expertise while providing new sources of growth and prosperity that reduce dependence on any single product line or customer segment, creating business resilience and cultural influence that enable continued success even when market conditions change or competitive pressures increase in traditional areas of woodworking activity. As you allow these insights about innovation, diversification, and cultural influence to settle into your consciousness, while feeling your body becoming more relaxed and your mind more open to new possibilities, you might recognize how these same principles apply in your modern world, where sustainable abundance often comes from building upon existing mathematical understanding and creative capabilities to develop new opportunities for value creation and service that enable continued growth and prosperity, even as markets evolve and competitive conditions change in ways that require adaptability and strategic thinking rather than simple repetition of established approaches. As the ancient summer evening deepens into the magical hours when the blazing heat of the Egyptian day finally gives way to the blessed coolness that makes detailed work possible again, with the gentle sounds of hand tools and quiet conversations creating a rhythmic backdrop of purposeful activity that synchronizes with the natural rhythms of breath and heartbeat, Kai discovers that the most successful carpenters operate according to principles that go far deeper than technical craftsmanship or geometric knowledge, encompassing a profound understanding of human consciousness, spiritual dynamics, and the underlying forces that drive all creation throughout the interconnected networks of energy and intention that connect Egyptian workshops to cosmic patterns spanning from the movement of celestial bodies to the growth cycles of sacred trees, where superior woodworking serves not just practical functions, but also consciousness-expanding purposes that reflect divine principles and cosmic laws that determine how physical environments influence spiritual development and how spiritual consciousness shapes material reality through focused intention and skillful action, guided by mathematical principles and natural wisdom. As you allow yourself to settle even more deeply into the comfortable embrace of your bed, feeling the soft warmth enveloping your body, while the gentle crackling of the fire creates the perfect atmosphere for absorbing these profound insights about the nature of lasting prosperity and the deeper currents that carry abundance to those who align themselves with natural principles of harmony and service to purposes larger than individual benefit alone. Imagine Kai's growing realization that these master carpenters don't just participate in the Egyptian economy, they help to shape and direct the spiritual evolution of an entire civilization through their decisions about what types of objects to create, which geometric principles to embody, and how to structure their workshops in ways that create opportunities not just for their own prosperity, but for entire communities of priests, nobles, scholars, and citizens whose spiritual development depends on having access to furniture and architectural elements that enable them to achieve states of consciousness and levels of spiritual advancement impossible without environments that support rather than interfere with the natural processes of consciousness, expansion, and divine communion. This deeper level of cultural participation requires thinking beyond immediate customer requirements to consider how current decisions will influence future possibilities for entire civilizations, how individual creations contribute to larger patterns of spiritual and cultural development that benefit countless generations, and how local craftsmanship connects to broader cosmic patterns and divine purposes that carry human consciousness toward higher levels of understanding and capability through the creation of physical environments that reflect and support the mathematical principles and spiritual laws that govern all successful evolution and consciousness development. The ancient workshop reveals that true mastery of woodworking involves understanding the invisible networks of energy and intention that connect all conscious beings across vast distances and through multiple dimensions of existence, creating formal and informal systems for sharing spiritual insights, coordinating responses to cosmic influences, and identifying collaborative opportunities that benefit entire spiritual communities while simultaneously advancing individual consciousness development in ways that demonstrate how personal growth and collective advancement work together rather than against each other when approached with sufficient wisdom and spiritual understanding. Master Ptah's workshop participates in one such network that spans the major spiritual centers throughout Egypt and beyond, enabling him to learn about consciousness developments in distant temples, share his own geometric discoveries with other master craftsmen and spiritual teachers, and coordinate with priests and scholars across cultural and geographical boundaries that might seem insurmountable to people who lack the spiritual development and energetic sensitivity necessary for conducting consciousness work based on direct spiritual communion rather than formal communication methods that may be inadequate for transmitting the subtle energetic information that determines whether objects and environments support or interfere with spiritual development and divine communion. Kai observes that participation in these networks requires not just technical competence and geometric knowledge, but also spiritual development, energetic sensitivity, and the kind of consciousness expansion that enables craftsmen from different backgrounds and traditions to share insights and coordinate activities despite never having physical contact or formal agreements about collaboration and mutual support. As you absorb this understanding about the crucial importance of spiritual networks and consciousness development in creating sustainable abundance, feeling your breathing become slower and more rhythmic, while your mind opens to new possibilities for spiritual connection and consciousness expansion in your own life, you might recognize how these same principles operate in your modern world, where success increasingly depends on your ability to develop authentic spiritual awareness, contribute to consciousness evolution, and participate meaningfully in networks of spiritual development that create mutual benefit for all participants, rather than simply seeking personal advancement without regard for the spiritual welfare and consciousness development of others who share common interests in spiritual growth and the advancement of human potential for divine communion and cosmic understanding. The sophistication of Egyptian spiritual networks becomes even more apparent as Kai learns that successful carpenters use their understanding of these broader consciousness patterns to create what Master Khnum calls evolutionary value, improvements and innovations that benefit entire spiritual communities while simultaneously accelerating their own consciousness development in ways that create lasting advantages over craftsmen who focus solely on individual projects and immediate profits, without considering how their actions affect the overall spiritual development and consciousness evolution of the communities and civilizations in which they live and work. Khnum's workshop succeeds not just because he creates superior furniture and maintains excellent customer relationships, but because he has systematically worked to advance the overall spiritual infrastructure that supports human consciousness development, including developing geometric principles that enhance meditation effectiveness, creating furniture designs that support spiritual practices, and establishing workshop procedures that maintain high spiritual vibrations while enabling craftsmen to achieve expanded states of consciousness through their work, rather than treating woodworking as merely mechanical activity divorced from spiritual development and consciousness evolution. This approach to creating evolutionary value demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of how individual consciousness development connects to collective spiritual advancement, recognizing that the most sustainable and satisfying forms of abundance come from contributing to consciousness evolution that benefits many people, rather than simply extracting maximum value from existing spiritual and cultural arrangements without regard for their long-term viability or their impact on the spiritual development of other participants in the consciousness network. As Kai watches Khnum explain to a group of younger carpenters how certain geometric innovations will benefit everyone involved in consciousness work while simultaneously accelerating Khnum's own spiritual development by creating conditions that favor craftsmen who understand and implement higher principles of sacred geometry and spiritual awareness. He begins to understand that true abundance consciousness involves thinking beyond zero-sum competition to encompass positive-sum collaboration that creates more consciousness and spiritual development for everyone, rather than simply redistributing existing awareness and spiritual attainment in ways that benefit some participants at the expense of others. The evening workshop also reveals how master craftsmen use their understanding of deeper spiritual and cosmic patterns to identify emerging consciousness opportunities that aren't yet obvious to their competitors, positioning themselves to benefit from spiritual developments that others won't recognize until consciousness conditions have already shifted and first-mover advantages have been captured by those who understood the implications of early spiritual signals and cosmic trends that might have seemed insignificant or unrelated to immediate woodworking concerns, but actually represented important indicators of fundamental changes in human consciousness, spiritual practices, and divine communion requirements. Master Thoth's specialized knowledge of consciousness-supporting furniture exemplifies this principle, as Kai learns that Thoth's investment in developing expertise for creating objects that enhance meditation and spiritual practice initially seemed like a narrow specialization with limited market potential, but has proven extremely valuable as spiritual awakening and consciousness development have created increasing demand for furniture that meets exacting specifications for energetic purity, geometric harmony, and spiritual appropriateness that traditional woodworking cannot provide without substantial innovation and expanded consciousness understanding. This ability to recognize emerging consciousness opportunities requires not just analytical intelligence and geometric knowledge, but also spiritual sensitivity and intuitive awareness that can perceive subtle changes in collective consciousness, spiritual practices, cosmic influences, and divine guidance that might seem unrelated to immediate furniture production, but could dramatically impact future spiritual requirements for those perceptive enough to understand their implications and spiritually developed enough to position themselves appropriately before these consciousness changes become obvious to competitors, who then face the disadvantage of trying to develop spiritual capabilities after market demand has already been established and early adopters have captured preferred relationships with spiritually advanced customers and premium opportunities for consciousness-supporting work. As you allow this insight about consciousness development and spiritual opportunity recognition to settle naturally into your consciousness, feeling your mind becoming more receptive and your body more completely relaxed, you might notice how your own awareness of possibilities begins to expand beyond obvious opportunities to encompass subtler spiritual signals and emerging consciousness trends that could represent significant sources of value creation and spiritual development in your personal and professional life. If you develop the spiritual sensitivity and consciousness expansion necessary for recognizing them before they become apparent to everyone else in your field or area of spiritual interest. The ancient evening continues with Kai discovering that the most prosperous carpenters don't just adapt to changing spiritual conditions, but actively work to create consciousness conditions that favor their particular spiritual strengths and divine purposes, demonstrating a level of spiritual mastery that goes far beyond reactive adjustment to encompass proactive influence over the consciousness and spiritual environment in which they operate and from which they derive both material income and spiritual development. Master Ptah's workshop illustrates this principle as Kai learns that Ptah has systematically worked to educate his customers about consciousness differences that might not be immediately apparent but significantly affect spiritual development and divine communion, establish geometric standards that favor his spiritual understanding and consciousness, supporting methods, and create customer expectations that make it difficult for competitors to succeed without matching his level of spiritual development and consciousness awareness, effectively raising the spiritual requirements in ways that benefit customers while strengthening his own market position and spiritual influence through demonstrated spiritual mastery rather than simple marketing claims or price competition. This approach to consciousness creation and spiritual influence requires understanding not just what customers currently want spiritually, but what they could want if they understood consciousness possibilities they haven't yet considered, demonstrating that true spiritual entrepreneurship often involves expanding spiritual awareness rather than simply competing for existing consciousness development through conventional approaches or minor modifications that don't fundamentally change the spiritual value proposition or consciousness experience. As Kai observes Ptah explaining to potential customers how superior geometric understanding and consciousness supporting methods can improve spiritual development, reduce meditation difficulties, and provide better long-term consciousness advancement. Despite initially requiring more spiritual discipline and conscious attention, he begins to understand that creating spiritual abundance often involves helping other people recognize and pursue their own consciousness development, rather than simply capturing a larger share of existing spiritual interest through more efficient competition or superior spiritual marketing that doesn't create additional consciousness value for anyone involved in the spiritual transaction. The sophistication of this approach to consciousness development becomes even more apparent as Kai realizes that Ptah isn't just selling furniture, but facilitating consciousness evolution in ways that benefit everyone involved in the spiritual transaction while creating customer loyalty based on genuine spiritual advancement and consciousness development, rather than simply habit or convenience. This consciousness-supporting approach requires significant investment of spiritual energy and advanced understanding, but it creates spiritual advantages that can't be easily replicated by competitors who focus only on material considerations or conventional spiritual approaches, without developing the consciousness awareness and spiritual sensitivity necessary for helping customers understand the full spiritual value of what they're receiving and why consciousness supporting quality justifies premium pricing that initially might seem expensive, but actually provides better spiritual value when consciousness development and long-term spiritual advancement are considered over the entire spiritual journey of the user. As Kai absorbs these insights about consciousness creation and spiritual customer development, feeling his understanding of spiritual value creation expanding to encompass these more sophisticated approaches to consciousness, work that go beyond simple object transactions to encompass spiritual consulting, consciousness education, and relationship building that provide ongoing spiritual value to customers while generating sustainable competitive advantages based on genuine spiritual mastery, he begins to recognize that the most successful carpenters don't just make furniture, but create consciousness experiences and spiritual relationships that provide ongoing spiritual value to customers while generating sustainable prosperity based on mutual spiritual advancement and genuine consciousness development, rather than short-term profit maximization that might compromise long-term spiritual relationship quality and consciousness evolution. The evening workshop reveals another dimension of spiritual sophistication that Kai hadn't previously understood: the importance of what Master Kanum calls consciousness arbitrage, the ability to recognize and take advantage of timing differences in how spiritual insights, consciousness developments, and divine guidance move through different spiritual communities and consciousness levels, creating spiritual opportunities based on understanding these consciousness differentials, rather than simply competing on geometric quality or conventional spiritual approaches in direct competition with other carpenters, serving the same customers with similar consciousness levels at the same spiritual development stage. Kanum's success with advanced consciousness supporting furniture depends partially on his understanding of how spiritual developments affect consciousness requirements in different communities, how cosmic influences create demand for specialized spiritual support before these requirements become obvious to carpenters who focus only on traditional spiritual markets, and how consciousness cycles and spiritual seasons create predictable but temporally separated spiritual demands that create opportunities for craftsmen who understand these consciousness patterns and position themselves appropriately to serve emerging spiritual needs that other carpenters either don't recognize or lack the consciousness development to address effectively. This consciousness-based approach to spiritual strategy requires sophisticated understanding of how different spiritual communities operate, how consciousness insights travel between spiritual centers, and how various cosmic and spiritual factors affect consciousness development in ways that create temporary spiritual imbalances that can be extremely beneficial for carpenters who recognize them early and position themselves to take advantage of these consciousness opportunities before they become obvious to competitors, or before spiritual forces eliminate the consciousness potential through spiritual development or consciousness adjustments that restore spiritual equilibrium. Kai realizes that this approach to spiritual development represents a form of consciousness intelligence that goes beyond simple spiritual analysis to encompass understanding of complex consciousness systems, spiritual timing relationships, and divine guidance flows that create opportunities for those spiritually sophisticated enough to recognize and serve them appropriately while providing genuine spiritual value to customers who benefit from having access to consciousness supporting capabilities when they need them most for their spiritual development. As you allow this understanding about consciousness arbitrage and spiritual timing to flow into your consciousness, feeling your mind expanding to encompass these more sophisticated approaches to consciousness development and spiritual value creation. You might notice how these same principles apply in your modern world, where spiritual insights, consciousness developments, and divine guidance still move at different speeds through different spiritual communities and consciousness levels, creating similar spiritual opportunities for those wise enough to recognize them and spiritually developed enough to take advantage of them in ways that create consciousness value for all participants, rather than simply extracting spiritual benefit from temporary consciousness inefficiencies without providing corresponding spiritual benefits to customers or communities that enable sustainable spiritual relationships and long-term consciousness development. As the ancient summer evening reaches its most peaceful and contemplative hours, when the last traces of the Egyptian heat finally dissipate and the gentle coolness of night brings blessed relief that makes the most intricate spiritual work possible again, with the soft glow of oil lamps creating an almost sacred atmosphere where the deepest truths about consciousness and prosperity can be shared and absorbed by those ready to receive them and integrate them into their own spiritual development. Kai experiences a profound transformation in his understanding of what true mastery means and how genuine abundance flows through the lives of those who align themselves with principles that transcend any particular craft or historical period, because they reflect fundamental laws of consciousness, creation, and divine service that operate consistently throughout all dimensions of existence, regardless of technological developments, economic systems, or cultural contexts that might seem to change everything, but actually only affect the surface appearance of activities that remain essentially the same in their deeper spiritual structure and underlying consciousness dynamics. The master carpenters, who have become his spiritual teachers throughout this magical evening, don't simply possess superior technical skills or more extensive geometric knowledge than other craftsmen. They embody a way of consciousness and spiritual being that attracts prosperity naturally, effortlessly, and sustainably, because they understand that true wealth flows not to those who grasp and accumulate for personal benefit alone, but to those who serve divine purposes and transform raw potential into realized spiritual value in ways that benefit entire civilizations, while simultaneously fulfilling their own deepest needs for meaningful work, spiritual development, and the profound satisfaction that comes from contributing something genuinely valuable to the ongoing evolution of human consciousness and divine manifestation through physical creation. As you allow yourself to sink into the deepest levels of relaxation and spiritual receptivity, feeling your body completely supported by the comfortable bed, while your mind opens fully to receive the profound wisdom that Kai is discovering in these final hours of his transformative spiritual experience. Imagine the warm, golden light of the oil lamps creating an almost mystical atmosphere where ancient secrets of consciousness and abundance can be transmitted from spiritual master to spiritual student in ways that transcend ordinary teaching to become direct transmission of consciousness about how spiritual awareness itself participates in the divine creative processes that turn potential into reality through the application of spiritual attention, divine intention, sacred skill, and consciousness service to purposes larger than individual benefit alone. Master Pita's final spiritual lesson of the evening involves something he calls the eternal workshop, the invisible but omnipresent divine creative force that links all truly masterful craftsmen across time and space and consciousness levels, creating a network of spiritual excellence that operates according to consciousness principles that transcend particular historical periods, specific technologies, or individual cultural contexts, because these principles reflect fundamental laws of divine creation and spiritual transformation that remain constant regardless of external circumstances or apparent limitations that might seem to constrain what individuals can accomplish through dedicated application of their spiritual talents and consciousness capabilities in service to divine objectives that honor both material requirements and transcendent spiritual purposes. This eternal workshop of consciousness mastery reveals itself through the way successful carpenters think about their spiritual relationship with wood, geometric principles, divine guidance, and cosmic patterns, the fundamental spiritual elements that must be harmonized to create objects that serve not just practical requirements, but also higher consciousness purposes related to spiritual beauty, divine strength, and the advancement of human consciousness and spiritual development that benefits countless generations of beings who will use and appreciate the results of spiritual excellence applied with divine wisdom and conscious dedication to the ancient art of consciousness transformation that connects human awareness to cosmic principles of divine creation and spiritual manifestation. Kai watches in spiritual amazement as Master Ptah completes the final details on a magnificent ceremonial throne that represents months of careful spiritual planning, skilled consciousness execution, and innovative consciousness problem solving. But Ptah's spiritual attention focuses not on celebrating his technical achievement or calculating his material profit, but on ensuring that every aspect of the throne reflects the highest possible standards of consciousness craftsmanship that will enable it to serve its sacred function of supporting divine consciousness and facilitating spiritual communion through the beauty and geometric perfection that inspire reverence and remind users of the cosmic principles that govern all successful spiritual development and divine communion in both material and transcendent dimensions of consciousness existence. Master Khnum demonstrates the same spiritual principle in his approach to training younger carpenters, spending considerable spiritual time not just teaching specific geometric techniques, but helping apprentices understand the deeper consciousness principles that enable craftsmen to adapt their spiritual skills to new consciousness challenges and continue developing their spiritual capabilities throughout their lives as consciousness conditions change and new spiritual requirements emerge that demand innovative consciousness solutions based on solid foundations of proven spiritual principles and deep understanding of the divine laws that govern all successful consciousness transformation processes. This generous sharing of valuable spiritual knowledge might seem counterproductive from a narrow consciousness competitive perspective, where spiritual information represents consciousness advantage over potential spiritual rivals. But Kai begins to understand that Khnum's willingness to share consciousness education actually strengthens his own spiritual position by raising the overall quality of consciousness work in the region, creating a reputation for spiritual excellence that benefits everyone involved while attracting the most challenging and spiritually rewarding projects that enable master craftsmen to continue developing their consciousness skills while earning the spiritual respect and material compensation that reflects their contribution to collective consciousness, prosperity, and spiritual advancement. As you absorb this understanding about the interconnected nature of individual consciousness mastery and collective spiritual excellence, feeling your breathing becomes slower and more natural, while your consciousness expands to encompass these profound insights about the true nature of spiritual craftsmanship and consciousness value creation, you might recognize how these same spiritual principles operate in your modern world, where the most successful individuals and organizations achieve lasting prosperity, not by competing more aggressively against others in consciousness terms, but by elevating consciousness standards and spiritual capabilities throughout their communities and industries, not by hoarding spiritual knowledge and consciousness opportunities, but by creating and sharing them in ways that generate spiritual excellence for everyone involved in the process of continuous consciousness improvement and mutual spiritual advancement that benefits entire communities while enabling individual achievement of the highest levels of spiritual satisfaction and material success that comes from serving consciousness, purposes larger than personal benefit alone. The eternal workshop of consciousness mastery that Kai discovers connects him across millennia to your own life and your own opportunities for developing spiritual excellence in whatever field or endeavor you choose to pursue with consciousness, dedication, and proper understanding of the spiritual principles that enable sustained achievement of superior results that serve both personal and broader consciousness community interests while contributing to the ongoing advancement of human spiritual capability and divine consciousness development. The ancient evening reveals another aspect of the eternal workshop that Kai hadn't previously understood: the way that truly masterful carpenters approach their spiritual relationship with the fundamental consciousness elements, treating wood, geometric principles, divine guidance, and cosmic patterns not as mere materials and concepts to be manipulated according to predetermined spiritual plans, but as consciousness collaborators in a sacred process of divine transformation, where the inherent characteristics and spiritual essence of natural forces and consciousness principles are understood, respected, and utilized in ways that bring out their highest spiritual potential while achieving consciousness objectives that serve both human spiritual needs and divine spiritual aspirations. Master Thoth demonstrates this spiritual principle as he selects wood for a new consciousness project, explaining how he attunes himself to the spiritual as well as physical properties of each piece, understanding how its spiritual history and consciousness composition affect not just its working characteristics and geometric behavior, but also its capacity to hold and transmit the spiritual intentions and consciousness energies that the carpenter brings to the divine creative process through focused spiritual attention and conscious participation in the ancient art of consciousness transformation that connects human awareness to cosmic principles of divine creation and spiritual manifestation. This collaborative consciousness approach to materials reveals a sophisticated understanding of how spiritual mastery involves not just technical control over consciousness processes and spiritual outcomes, but consciousness alignment with divine forces and cosmic principles that govern all successful spiritual creation and consciousness transformation in both material and metaphysical dimensions of spiritual reality. Kai realizes that this approach to woodworking as sacred consciousness work represents a fundamental shift in spiritual awareness that extends far beyond carpentry to encompass any situation where people work with consciousness forces and spiritual energies to create results that serve important spiritual purposes and reflect the highest possible standards of consciousness, excellence, and spiritual integrity in both technical execution and divine intention. As you allow this insight about sacred consciousness work and divine collaboration with spiritual forces to settle into your consciousness, feeling your understanding of spiritual mastery expanding to encompass these more profound dimensions of consciousness, creative work, and spiritual value creation, you might recognize how these same spiritual principles apply in your own life, where sustainable success comes not from forcing spiritual outcomes through consciousness struggle and spiritual resistance, but from understanding and working with divine patterns and consciousness principles in ways that create spiritual results that seem effortless because they align with rather than oppose the deeper currents of consciousness, creativity, and spiritual manifestation that flow through all successful spiritual endeavors when approached with proper spiritual understanding and reverent consciousness attention. The evening workshop concludes with Kai's complete spiritual transformation from someone who thought about woodworking in terms of technical skills and material competition to someone who understands consciousness mastery as a vehicle for spiritual development, divine service, and participation in larger patterns of cosmic consciousness creativity that connect individual spiritual achievement to universal consciousness purposes related to the ongoing evolution of divine awareness and the advancement of human capability to create spiritual beauty and consciousness meaning through skillful work that honors both material requirements and transcendent spiritual values. Master Pita's final consciousness words capture the essence of this spiritual transformation as he explains that true consciousness mastery comes not from accumulating spiritual skills or achieving material recognition, but from developing the spiritual capacity to serve as a conscious channel for divine creative forces that seek expression through human consciousness and spiritual capability, creating consciousness value that serves others while simultaneously fulfilling your own deepest need for meaningful spiritual work that contributes something genuinely valuable to the ongoing development of human consciousness civilization and the advancement of divine awareness itself through the creation of spiritual beauty and consciousness utility that reflects the highest aspirations of embodied spiritual beings working in harmony with cosmic consciousness principles of divine creation and spiritual transformation. This spiritual understanding represents a fundamental shift from ego-based consciousness that sees mastery as a means of personal spiritual aggrandizement or consciousness competitive advantage over others, to service-based spiritual consciousness that recognizes mastery as a sacred consciousness responsibility to contribute the best possible spiritual work to endeavors that benefit many consciousness beings, while providing opportunities for spiritual growth and consciousness satisfaction that come from knowing that your spiritual efforts have made a positive difference in the consciousness world and contributed to the advancement of human spiritual capability and cosmic consciousness development through conscious participation in the universal consciousness processes of divine creation and spiritual manifestation that operate through individual consciousness when properly aligned with transcendent spiritual purposes and divine consciousness principles. Kai's consciousness transformation reflects changes that can occur in your own spiritual life as you absorb these timeless consciousness principles of sacred work and begin to apply them in your modern spiritual context, recognizing that the same divine consciousness that enabled ancient carpenters to create objects of legendary spiritual beauty and consciousness power continues to operate today for those who understand how to align themselves with consciousness principles of spiritual excellence, divine service, and conscious creativity that transcend particular technologies or economic systems because they reflect fundamental aspects of spiritual development and the consciousness satisfaction that comes from meaningful spiritual work. As you feel yourself drifting toward peaceful sleep, your subconscious mind continues to absorb and integrate these profound spiritual lessons about the true nature of consciousness mastery, sacred work, and the eternal workshop that connects all consciousness beings throughout spiritual history who have dedicated themselves to creating spiritual value that serves others while pursuing their own highest spiritual potential for consciousness, skill development, and divine growth through meaningful contribution to the advancement of human consciousness, capability, and cosmic spiritual evolution. The warm evening air carries Kai's final consciousness realization that mastery isn't something you achieve through spiritual competition or accumulation of consciousness credentials, but something you spiritually become as you develop the divine consciousness and spiritual capabilities that naturally attract opportunities for creating consciousness value while serving spiritual purposes larger than personal benefit alone. Recognizing that true spiritual satisfaction comes not from what you can get through your consciousness skills, but from what you can give through the conscious application of those spiritual skills in service to the sacred work of consciousness transformation that benefits others while providing opportunities for continued spiritual growth and divine consciousness development. This spiritual understanding transforms his consciousness relationship with his craft from one of anxiety about spiritual competition and concern about material security to one of divine confidence and consciousness flow. Recognizing that spiritual excellence naturally attracts consciousness opportunities, and that consciousness mastery creates its own spiritual abundance through the consciousness value it provides to others who appreciate and reward superior spiritual quality that enables them to achieve their own important consciousness objectives while participating in the larger patterns of spiritual and consciousness development that connect individual spiritual success to cosmic consciousness purposes and universal spiritual principles of divine creation and consciousness manifestation. As you allow these final spiritual insights to settle into the deepest levels of your consciousness, feeling your body completely relaxed and your mind perfectly peaceful, you can trust that your subconscious will continue processing and integrating these powerful consciousness lessons throughout your sleep, enabling you to wake tomorrow with expanded spiritual awareness of your own capacity for developing consciousness mastery through sacred work, spiritual development, and the patient application of your unique spiritual talents in ways that benefit both yourself and others, while contributing to the ongoing advancement of human consciousness and cosmic spiritual evolution. The eternal workshop of consciousness mastery that Kai discovered in the ancient carpentry workshops connects you to countless others throughout spiritual history who have learned these same consciousness principles and used them to create lives of spiritual meaning, consciousness excellence, and sustainable prosperity that flows naturally from their commitment to creating spiritual value for others while pursuing their own highest spiritual potential for consciousness, skill development, and divine growth through meaningful contribution to spiritual endeavors that serve consciousness purposes larger than personal benefit alone, while reflecting the highest spiritual aspirations of human consciousness, working in harmony with cosmic consciousness principles of divine creation and spiritual transformation. The gentle crackling of the fire continues to provide the perfect backdrop for your peaceful rest as you drift into restorative sleep, knowing that you are connected to this timeless tradition of sacred consciousness work that transcends any particular historical period or technological context, because it reflects fundamental spiritual truths about consciousness development, divine creative expression, and the spiritual laws that govern the manifestation of divine consciousness through skilled spiritual work that serves both individual consciousness growth and cosmic spiritual evolution. Your dreams tonight will be filled with eternal workshops of consciousness possibility, spiritual connection, and divine creative potential that weave themselves into your waking consciousness as new spiritual awareness of opportunities for developing consciousness, excellence through sacred work, spiritual insights about the relationship between consciousness mastery and divine development, and confidence in your ability to create spiritual value and attract abundance through alignment with these eternal consciousness principles of divine craftsmanship, spiritual service, and participation in the universal consciousness processes of divine creation that operate as reliably in your modern world as they did in Kai's ancient workshop. Kai's consciousness story concludes with him walking slowly home through the quiet streets of ancient Thebes, his heart full of gratitude for the profound spiritual teachings he has received, and his consciousness illuminated with understanding about how consciousness mastery serves not just personal spiritual development, but sacred consciousness purposes related to divine advancement and cosmic spiritual evolution. Knowing that tomorrow will bring new consciousness opportunities to apply these spiritual principles while continuing to develop his consciousness capabilities in service to the eternal workshop of divine transformation that benefits others while providing deep spiritual satisfaction that comes from meaningful consciousness work and spiritual growth through conscious participation in the universal divine creativity that flows through all spiritual beings who align themselves with transcendent consciousness purposes and cosmic spiritual principles, ensuring that every spiritual cut, every consciousness joint, and every moment of dedicated divine service contributes to the ongoing advancement of human consciousness and the manifestation of divine spiritual beauty and cosmic purpose through the patient, loving application of consciousness mastery in service to the greater spiritual good that encompasses all consciousness beings and all spiritual possibilities for divine growth, consciousness learning, and the expression of infinite spiritual creative potential through finite human consciousness, guided by infinite divine wisdom and cosmic spiritual love.